For 11 agonizing years, the majestic, unforgiving slopes of Mount Hooker held a chilling secret, a mystery that gnawed at the hearts of two families and baffled seasoned search and rescue teams. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and brutal indifference, where peaks touched the sky and shadows clung to the crags. But on a seemingly ordinary day, long after hope had dwindled to a faint ember, a discovery was made high up on that formidable mountain face, a discovery so profound and so utterly unexpected that it would shatter the quiet assumptions of a decade and plunge everyone back into the icy grip of uncertainty. This was not merely the finding of lost equipment. It was the unearthing of a past, a reawakening of a tragedy, and a stark, horrifying redefinition of what truly transpired on that fateful climb. The mountains, it seemed, had finally decided to speak, and their whispers carried a tale far darker than anyone could have ever imagined. The year was 1989. The Iron Curtain, though beginning to fray, still held Eastern Europe in its firm, communist embrace. Romania, under the autocratic rule of Nicolae Ceausescu, was a land of stark contrasts. Ancient traditions clashing with modern aspirations, and personal freedoms severely curtailed by a pervasive state apparatus. For many young people, the oppressive atmosphere fueled a yearning for escape, for adventure, for anything that promised a taste of liberation. It was against this backdrop that two vibrant souls, embarking on what they believed would be the grandest adventure of their lives, disappeared into the wilderness, leaving behind a void that no political upheaval or passage of time could ever truly fill. Their story, though deeply personal, became intertwined with the very fabric of a nation on the brink of change. The couple at the heart of this unfolding mystery were Adrian Vlăducu and Doina Moga. Adrian, at 27, was a beacon of youthful exuberance, a talented engineer whose passion for the mountains was as boundless as the peaks he sought to conquer. His eyes held the glint of an explorer, a man constantly drawn to the next challenge, the next summit. He was known for his meticulous planning, his physical prowess, and an unshakable confidence that inspired those around him. Doina, just 23, was his fiancée, a woman whose quiet strength complemented Adrian's more effusive nature. An economist by profession, she possessed an inner calm, a thoughtful demeanor that belied a fierce spirit of adventure. Together, they were an inseparable pair, their love story unfolding against the dramatic canvases of the Carpathian Mountains. They shared not just a romantic bond, but a profound connection forged in their mutual adoration for climbing, for the raw, untamed beauty of nature, and for the thrilling challenge of pushing their physical and mental limits. Their dream was to conquer Mount Hooker, a peak that, while not the highest, presented a formidable technical challenge, its sheer rock faces and unpredictable weather demanding respect from even the most seasoned climbers. This ascent was to be more than just a climb. It was a symbol of their future together, a testament to their shared aspirations, and a grand prelude to their impending marriage. They meticulously prepared for weeks, studying maps, checking their gear, and planning every detail of their route. Their expedition was scheduled for the end of August, a time when the mountain weather was typically more stable, though the Carpathians always held the potential for sudden, violent storms. They had chosen a particularly challenging route, one that required expert climbing techniques and a significant degree of endurance. Their families, though accustomed to their mountaineering pursuits, felt the familiar pang of anxiety that always accompanies such ambitious endeavors. Yet, they trusted Adrian's experience and Doina's steady judgment. There was a sense of excitement mixed with the usual apprehension, a belief that this young couple, so full of life and promise, would undoubtedly return with thrilling tales of their triumph. They waved goodbye, promising to return with photographs and stories, completely unaware that these would be their final farewells. The journey began with high spirits. Adrian and Doina set off with their backpacks laden with essential gear: ropes, ice axes, carabiners, a small tent, and enough provisions for several days. Their initial ascent was challenging but successful. They were experienced climbers, accustomed to the strenuous demands of the mountains. They navigated treacherous scree slopes, scaled sheer rock faces, and traversed narrow ridges, their movements fluid and practiced. Each day brought them closer to their goal, the summit of Mount Hooker, a symbol of their love and determination. They communicated with a friend, another climber named George, who was waiting for them at a designated meeting point lower down the mountain. Their last radio contact with George was made from what they described as a temporary camp, high on a ledge, their voices filled with the quiet exhilaration of progress. They reported good weather, clear skies, and a strong sense of optimism. George remembered their excitement, their certainty that they were just a day or two away from reaching the summit. That evening, as darkness enveloped the mountains, a sudden, brutal storm descended upon the Carpathians. Without warning, the skies opened up, unleashing a torrent of rain, howling winds, and plummeting temperatures. The storm raged for nearly 3 days, blanketing the upper reaches of Mount Hooker in a thick shroud of fog and ice. The ferocity of it was legendary, even for a region known for its volatile weather. Lower down, George waited, his initial concerns slowly morphing into a gnawing dread. He tried to establish radio contact, but the airwaves were silent, choked by the storm's furious static. He knew that any climber caught in such a tempest, especially at high altitudes, faced an almost insurmountable challenge for survival. When the storm finally broke, revealing a landscape transformed by fresh snow and ice, George immediately raised the alarm. The search began with a desperate urgency. Adrian and Doina were experienced, but even the most seasoned climbers could be overwhelmed by the sheer power of nature. Teams of dedicated mountain rescuers, along with fellow climbers and volunteers, converged on Mount Hooker. They meticulously scoured the known routes, rappelled down steep cliffs, and explored deep crevasses. Helicopters, when the weather permitted, flew low over the treacherous terrain, their powerful spotlights piercing the mist. The families of Adrian and Doina arrived, their faces etched with a grief that words could not capture, their hearts torn between a sliver of hope and an overwhelming tide of despair. Days turned into weeks. The search extended beyond the immediate vicinity of Mount Hooker, encompassing wider areas of the Fagarash Mountains. Every lead, no matter how faint, was pursued with unwavering dedication. Climbers reported seeing traces of a recent camp, a discarded piece of rope, a faint footprint, but nothing definitive, nothing that could lead them directly to Adrian and Doina. The wilderness, vast and indifferent, swallowed all traces of the young couple. The prevailing theory, born out of the evidence of the brutal storm, was that Adrian and Doina had been swept away by an avalanche or had fallen into a crevasse during the whiteout conditions. The mountain, they concluded, had claimed another pair of ambitious souls, their bodies likely buried under tons of snow and ice, or lost forever in the labyrinthine depths of the glacial fissures. It was a tragic but understandable explanation. The mountains were unforgiving, and accidents, though devastating, were an inherent risk of such pursuits. After several months of exhaustive searching, with no sign of the couple or their major equipment, the official search was called off. The families, devastated but resigned, held memorial services, their hopes crushed under the weight of an unyielding reality. Mount Hooker had taken Adrian and Doina, leaving behind only questions and an unbearable silence. For 11 long years, the story of Adrian and Doina became a somber legend among Romanian climbers, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires. Their names were etched into the memory of the mountaineering community, too bright, stars extinguished too soon. Their families, though slowly rebuilding their lives, carried the heavy burden of unresolved grief, forever wondering about the exact circumstances of their loved ones' final moments. The mountain remained, majestic and silent, guarding its secrets with an impenetrable stoicism. Time, the great healer, softened the edges of the initial shock, but the ache of absence remained. It was a wound that never quite closed, a mystery that never quite faded. Until, that is, the mountain chose to speak again. The late summer sun of 2000 cast long shadows over the Fagarash Mountains, a deceptive tranquility masking the raw, untamed power of the landscape. It was a season of quiet beauty, but also of unexpected revelations. Far from the bustling cities and the quiet contemplation of memorials, a new chapter in the story of Adrian and Doina was about to begin, triggered by an entirely unrelated expedition. A team of geologists and cartographers, working on a detailed survey of the Mount Hooker area, was meticulously traversing a remote, seldom visited ridge. Their mission was purely scientific, their minds focused on rock formations, fault lines, and the precise mapping of contours. They were seasoned outdoorsmen, accustomed to the rugged terrain, but their purpose was academic, not adventurous. As they navigated a particularly treacherous section of a high-altitude cliff face, one of the geologists, carefully securing his footing, noticed something unusual. It wasn't a rock, or a plant, or any natural feature of the mountain. Embedded in a small, sheltered alcove, tucked away from the prevailing winds and hidden from the casual glance, was a glint of unnatural color. Curiosity piqued, he cautiously approached, his heart beginning to quicken with a premonition he couldn't quite articulate. What he saw defied immediate comprehension. It was a piece of fabric, faded and weathered, but unmistakably man-made. He gently pulled at it, and with it, a cascade of other objects began to emerge from the debris of 11 years. It was a camp, or what remained of one, nestled precariously on a narrow ledge, high above the tree line. The discovery was immediately reported. The geological survey was put on hold, and within hours, a specialized search and rescue team, along with forensic investigators, began the arduous ascent to the remote location. The news traveled quickly, first through the close-knit mountaineering community, and then like wildfire to the families of Adrian and Doina. A decade of unanswered questions suddenly resurfaced, sharp and painful. There was a faint, almost unbearable flicker of hope, but it was quickly overshadowed by a growing sense of dread. What could have preserved the camp for so long, undetected, and what secrets did it hold? The site was extraordinary. It was a small, well-chosen bivouac, strategically placed for shelter from the elements. The remains of a small, brightly colored tent, though tattered and faded, were clearly visible. Nearby, a backpack lay half-buried under a thin layer of scree and snow, its contents still largely intact despite the passage of time. A rusted ice axe was propped against a rock, almost as if left there moments ago. The sheer preservation of the camp, tucked away in its secluded nook, was remarkable. It suggested that the storm, though brutal, had not directly obliterated this specific spot. As the forensic team carefully began their work, meticulously documenting and collecting every piece of evidence, the gravity of the discovery became undeniable. This was not merely the site of a lost camp. This was the last known location of Adrian and Doina. The immediate questions were plentiful and urgent. Why had this camp remained undiscovered for so long? And what had happened to the climbers themselves? Inside the tent, among other personal effects, they found a small, waterproof diary. Its pages, though water-stained and brittle, still held Adrian's distinctive handwriting. This was a direct link to the past, a potential window into their final days. The investigators knew that every word, every detail, every observation meticulously recorded by Adrian could be crucial. This was not merely an investigation into a lost couple. It was an attempt to reconstruct the last moments of their lives, to understand the tragedy that had unfolded on this silent mountain stage. The initial assessment of the campsite presented a paradox. There were no obvious signs of a struggle, no indications of a sudden avalanche or a catastrophic fall directly at the camp. The tent was still partially erected, suggesting that they had left it or been forced to leave it under less than immediate duress. The equipment, though old, was largely functional. This contradicted the long-held assumption that the couple had been caught unawares by the storm and immediately overwhelmed. The evidence pointed to a more deliberate, if still tragic, departure from the camp. The diary quickly became the central piece of evidence. Its final entries, painstakingly deciphered, detailed the early stages of their climb, their excitement, the challenges they faced, and their profound love for each other. It was a poignant read, a testament to their vibrant spirits. But the most crucial entries concerned the storm. Adrian had written about the sudden, terrifying onset of the tempest, the howling winds, and the desperate attempts to secure their camp. He described the plummeting temperatures, the blinding snow, and the sense of isolation that descended upon them. However, what truly stunned the investigators were the entries that followed. Adrian wrote about making it through the worst of the storm, describing a brief lull in the weather, a window of opportunity. He spoke of their decision to descend, to try and make it to a lower, safer altitude. This completely rewrote the official narrative. They hadn't been immediately consumed by the storm. They had survived its initial onslaught. They had made a conscious decision to move, to attempt an escape. The question then shifted from what happened to them during the storm to what happened to them after the storm when they left their camp. The diary contained no further entries, no clues about what transpired after their decision to descend. It ended abruptly, leaving a chilling void, a silent testament to the unknown dangers they had faced. The revelation that Adrian and Doina had survived the initial storm and then decided to descend opened a Pandora's box of new possibilities, each more unsettling than the last. If they weren't killed by the storm at their camp, then where had they gone, and what had truly befallen them? The mountain, it seemed, had only revealed part of its secret, leaving the most agonizing questions still unanswered. The families, upon hearing of the diary's contents, experienced a renewed surge of grief mixed with a desperate need for answers. The initial relief that their loved ones had not simply vanished without a trace was quickly replaced by a deeper, more profound anguish. If they had survived, why hadn't they been found? What unimaginable ordeal had they faced in the vast, unforgiving wilderness? The search resumed, but with a new, more focused objective: to retrace their likely descent route from the discovered camp. Specialized teams, equipped with advanced technology and guided by the diary's sparse clues, meticulously combed the treacherous slopes below the bivouac site. Every rock, every crevice, every snowdrift was examined with an intensity born of 11 years of pent-up questions. The mountain, once a silent guardian, now felt like a reluctant witness, slowly surrendering its secrets. This shift in the narrative was transformative. It was no longer a simple search for lost climbers. It was an investigation into a desperate struggle for survival, a race against time that had been lost over a decade ago. The discovery of the camp and Adrian's diary had not provided closure. It had, in fact, opened up a new, more complex, and ultimately more haunting chapter in the tragic saga of Adrian Vlăducu and Doina Moga. The mountain, it seemed, had only just begun to tell its tale. The discovery of the cliff camp and Adrian's diary had transformed a cold case into a chilling active investigation. The previous theory, that the couple had been overwhelmed by the initial storm, was now debunked. They had survived, made a conscious decision to move, and then vanished. This new information, while offering a semblance of their last known actions, only deepened the mystery, casting a long, ominous shadow over the initial assumptions. The forensic team, now equipped with a clear direction, focused their efforts on the area immediately below the camp, meticulously searching for any sign of Adrian and Doina's descent. The terrain was incredibly challenging. Steep, unstable scree slopes gave way to sheer rock faces and deep, snow-filled gullies. Every foot of ground had to be carefully assessed, every potential path scrutinized. The diary had provided invaluable insight. Adrian had mentioned their plan to follow a specific ridgeline down to a known glacier route. This was the target zone, a perilous stretch of mountain that even in good conditions demanded extreme caution. For several days, the search yielded nothing but the vast, indifferent expanse of the mountain. Hope began to wane again, replaced by the familiar ache of frustration. Had the mountain, once again, swallowed all traces? Just as the teams were considering expanding their search area, a breakthrough occurred. A sharp-eyed rescuer, rappelling down a particularly steep section of a gorge that paralleled the ridge Adrian had mentioned, spotted something unusual. It was a piece of bright orange fabric, snagged on a jagged rock outcropping, almost perfectly camouflaged against the drab gray of the stone. It was a fragment of a backpack, specifically the external pocket, recognized by Adrian's family as belonging to the one he had carried. This was it. This was the first definitive trace of their movement away from the camp. The location of the backpack fragment was critical. It was far below the cliff camp, much further than anyone had initially anticipated they might have descended in the immediate aftermath of the storm. This implied a significant, perhaps uncontrolled, fall. The team immediately secured the area and began a more intensive, grid-based search of the gorge below. The terrain was incredibly difficult, requiring ropes and specialized climbing gear to navigate. The air was thin, the wind biting, and the constant threat of rockfall loomed. It was a perilous and emotionally draining task. And then the ultimate discovery was made. Further down the gorge, nestled in a small, ice-filled gully, two figures were found. They were Adrian Vlăducu and Doina Moga. Their bodies, remarkably preserved by the ice and cold, lay entangled, a testament to their final, desperate struggle. They were still partially clothed in their mountaineering gear, their backpacks near them, fused to their bodies by the passage of time and the glacial embrace. The sight was heartbreaking, a stark and brutal confirmation of the worst fears held for 11 long years. The meticulous work of recovering the bodies and their personal effects began. It was a somber and delicate operation, requiring immense skill and sensitivity. Every item found with them was treated as a crucial piece of evidence, each fragment a potential key to understanding their final moments. With the recovery of the bodies, the investigation entered its most critical phase, the forensic examination. The initial post-mortem examination, conducted by experienced forensic pathologists, aimed to determine the cause of death and any other contributing factors. The condition of the bodies, preserved by the mountain's cold embrace, allowed for a more detailed examination than might otherwise have been possible after such a long time. The findings were devastating, yet also provided crucial answers. Both Adrian and Doina had sustained massive blunt force trauma, consistent with a high-altitude fall. Broken bones, internal injuries, and skull fractures were evident. The cause of death was unequivocal. They had fallen from a significant height, likely while attempting to descend the treacherous gorge. This confirmed the initial theory that the orange backpack fragment had suggested. However, the forensic examination also revealed something far more unsettling. While the injuries were consistent with a fall, there were no signs of the defensive wounds one might expect if they had been actively trying to arrest their fall. More profoundly, the analysis of their clothing revealed unexpected damage. There were deep tears and abrasions on their jackets and trousers that seemed inconsistent with a simple tumble down a rocky slope. These were sharp, focused tears, almost as if something had ripped through the fabric with force. Furthermore, the pathologist noted a series of unusual marks on their gear, particularly on Adrian's backpack and his metal ice axe. These were not the superficial scratches of typical mountaineering wear and tear. They were deeper, more deliberate indentations, almost like impact marks. The forensic team also discovered small, metallic fragments embedded in the fabric of their clothes and gear. These fragments, when analyzed, were not consistent with any known mountaineering equipment. They were composed of an unknown alloy, highly unusual and out of place. This was the first major red flag, the first indication that something was fundamentally wrong with the simple, tragic fall narrative. The nature of these fragments and the unusual damage to their gear pointed to an external force, something beyond a natural accident. The investigation pivoted sharply. What could have caused such specific aggressive damage? The possibility of an animal attack was briefly considered, but quickly ruled out. The marks were too precise, too metallic in nature. The initial assumption of a tragic but straightforward mountaineering accident began to unravel, replaced by a growing sense of unease. The presence of these inexplicable metallic fragments, coupled with the unusual tears and indentations, suggested a more complex and far more sinister scenario. The families, already reeling from the recovery of their loved ones, were now confronted with a new, horrifying possibility. Their grief, already profound, was now compounded by a chilling uncertainty. What force could have been at play on that remote mountain face? What had truly happened to Adrian and Doina during their desperate descent? The mountain, it seemed, had revealed its final, most shocking secret. Their deaths were not simply an act of nature. Something, or someone, had played a role in their ultimate demise. The initial relief of finding them, however tragic, was now replaced by a cold, unsettling dread. The story of Adrian and Doina, once a tale of a lost climbing couple, was now irrevocably transformed into a potential crime scene, a decades-old mystery that had finally resurfaced from the icy depths of Mount Hooker. The mountain's silence had been broken, but its true tale was far more terrifying than anyone could have ever anticipated. The initial forensic findings had cast a long, unsettling shadow over the presumed cause of death for Adrian and Doina. The presence of peculiar metallic fragments embedded in their clothing and equipment, coupled with unusual impact marks, defied the simple narrative of a tragic fall. This was no longer just an accident. It was a puzzle, a chilling enigma that pointed to an external, unidentified force. The investigation now shifted from a search and recovery operation to a meticulous forensic examination, akin to a crime scene analysis. Every scrap of material, every indentation, every subtle detail became a crucial piece of a much larger, more disturbing picture. The metallic fragments were subjected to advanced metallurgical analysis. The results were startling. The alloy was a highly specific composition of steel and other trace elements, not typically found in civilian mountaineering equipment or in the natural environment of the Fagarash Mountains. It was a hardened, specialized metal, designed for strength and durability. Further analysis suggested that these fragments had been sheared off a larger object with considerable force. This indicated a violent impact, something beyond the usual knocks and scrapes of a mountain ascent. Meanwhile, the tears and abrasions on Adrian and Doina's clothing were re-examined. Under powerful microscopes, the patterns of damage became clearer. They were not random rips. Instead, they appear to be consistent with having been snagged or torn by sharp, possibly rotating, edges. The fabric fibers showed evidence of friction and shearing, not simply stretching and tearing from fall. The implications were profound and deeply disturbing. This wasn't just a fall. It was an interaction with something powerful and artificial. The investigators, initially hesitant to entertain such extraordinary possibilities, were now forced to confront the unthinkable. Could Adrian and Doina have encountered something entirely unexpected, something man-made, high on that desolate mountain? The mountain was a vast, remote wilderness, yet it also bordered on areas occasionally used for military exercises. The thought, once dismissed as outlandish, now began to gain unsettling traction. Could military activity have played a role in this tragedy? This line of inquiry was particularly sensitive in communist Romania of the late 1980s. Military operations, especially those involving advanced or experimental equipment, were shrouded in absolute secrecy. Questions were not asked, and details were certainly not volunteered. The potential for a cover-up, even an accidental one, was immense. The investigators had to proceed with extreme caution, navigating the political landscape as carefully as they navigated the treacherous mountain terrain. Yet, the evidence was compelling. The type of alloy, the nature of the damage, it all pointed away from a natural accident and towards a collision with machinery. What kind of machinery could they have encountered high on Mount Hooker? The most plausible, though still shocking, explanation was that Adrian and Doina had somehow come into contact with a military aircraft, perhaps a low-flying helicopter or a drone engaged in reconnaissance or training. The idea was horrifying. Had they been struck by a piece of falling debris? Or worse, had their desperate descent been cut short by an active collision? This theory gained further momentum when investigators turned their attention to the peculiar indentations on Adrian's ice axe and backpack. These were not random impact marks. They had a distinct, almost rhythmic pattern. Some of the marks on the ice axe, in particular, suggested a glancing blow from a rapidly moving object, almost like a propeller blade. The implications sent shivers down the spines of the forensic team. Could Adrian have been using his ice axe to signal or to defend himself in the face of an approaching aircraft? Was this a desperate, futile attempt to ward off an aerial menace? The questions piled up, each one more chilling than the last. The scenario painted by the evidence was no longer a simple fall, but a potential aerial incident, a deadly encounter with a piece of military hardware in the vast, empty expanse of the mountains. This elevated the case from a tragic mountaineering accident to a matter of state security, forcing authorities to reluctantly acknowledge the unprecedented nature of the findings. The families, enduring yet another layer of unimaginable grief, now faced the crushing realization that their loved ones might have been victims of something far more insidious than the mountain's wrath. The hope for closure, once briefly glimpsed with the discovery of the bodies, was now replaced by a fierce, burning demand for truth. What had the military been doing in that area? And could their activities have directly led to the deaths of Adrian and Doina? The Romanian government, still in the throes of post-Ceausescu transition, was reluctant to open such a politically charged investigation. Any admission of military involvement, even accidental, could have severe ramifications. However, the forensic evidence was irrefutable. The metallic fragments, the distinct impact marks, the nature of the clothing damage, it all pointed to an external, artificial force. Under increasing pressure from the families and the international climbing community, a highly secretive and sensitive inquiry was launched. The military was compelled to cooperate, albeit reluctantly. Records were scrutinized, flight logs examined, and personnel questioned, all under strict confidentiality. The sheer audacity of the new theory, transforming a tragic accident into a potential military cover-up, was immense. But the mountain, through its silent preservation of evidence, had provided a voice for Adrian and Doina, demanding that their true story finally be told. Their deaths, it seemed, were not merely a tragic footnote in mountaineering history. They were a chilling testament to a hidden incident, a collision between human ambition and a secret, powerful presence in the skies above Mount Hooker. The truth, however unpalatable, was beginning to emerge from the shadows. The revelation that Adrian and Doina's deaths might not have been a mere mountaineering accident, but rather the result of an encounter with a military aircraft sent shockwaves far beyond the Făgăraș Mountains. The meticulous forensic evidence, particularly the unique metallic fragments and impact marks, was undeniable. It pointed to a violent interaction with something artificial, something that could only be explained by a collision with airborne machinery. The Romanian authorities, still navigating the tumultuous aftermath of the 1989 revolution, found themselves in a precarious position. The idea of military involvement, even accidental, in the deaths of two civilians was a politically explosive revelation. To admit culpability would be to tarnish the already fragile reputation of the post-communist state. Yet, to ignore the compelling evidence would be to perpetuate a blatant injustice. Under intense scrutiny from the families, the media, and international human rights organizations, a highly sensitive and clandestine investigation was initiated. Military records, notoriously opaque under the Ceausescu regime, were painstakingly reviewed. Flight logs, maintenance schedules, and patrol routes for the end of August 1989 were scrutinized for any anomalies. The Air Force, initially resistant, was compelled to cooperate, albeit with a visible reluctance that fueled further suspicion. The focus quickly narrowed to military helicopter activity. The type of damage observed on Adrian and Doina's gear, the shearing, the specific indentations, was highly consistent with a rotor strike or impact from a rapidly moving part of a helicopter's airframe. The alloy of the metallic fragments was also cross-referenced with various military aircraft components, leading to a chilling, though not definitive, match with certain types of rotor blades and structural elements used in Soviet-era helicopters, which formed the backbone of the Romanian Air Force at the time. The investigators, working under immense pressure, began to interview former military personnel who had been stationed in the region during the period of Adrian and Doina's disappearance. These interviews were fraught with difficulty. Memories were hazy, records were incomplete, and many individuals were understandably wary of speaking openly about sensitive military operations from a bygone era. However, a pattern slowly began to emerge. Several former pilots and ground crew members, speaking off the record and under strict conditions of anonymity, recalled a specific incident around the end of August 1989. They spoke of a lost flight or an unaccounted-for mission in the Făgăraș Mountains, a period during which a helicopter, likely an IR-330 Puma, had reportedly experienced technical difficulties and had to make an unscheduled landing or return to base. Details were vague, deliberately so, but the timing and location aligned chillingly with Adrian and Doina's last known movements. The story, as pieced together from these hushed accounts, suggested that a helicopter, possibly on a covert reconnaissance mission or a high-altitude training exercise, had encountered severe turbulence or mechanical failure during the brutal storm. In the chaotic conditions, flying low to the ground for visibility or attempting to gain control, it may have struck something, perhaps a rock outcropping or, tragically, Adrian and Doina themselves. The technical difficulties would have been a euphemism, a convenient cover story to obscure a more catastrophic event. The absence of any official record of a crash or significant damage was highly suspicious. It strongly suggested a deliberate cover-up, an attempt to prevent an embarrassing, potentially internationally condemned, incident from becoming public. In a communist state, such accidents, especially those involving the military, were rarely, if ever, acknowledged. The families, informed of these developments, were consumed by a fresh wave of agony. The initial grief for their lost children was now tinged with outrage and a burning desire for justice. Their loved ones hadn't just been victims of nature. They might have been victims of state apparatus, crushed beneath the gears of military secrecy. The implications were immense. This was no longer just a personal tragedy. It was a human rights issue, a potential case of gross negligence, and a deliberate cover-up. The investigators, now more convinced than ever of military involvement, faced the formidable task of proving it definitively. They needed more than vague recollections. They needed hard evidence that connected a specific military flight to the tragic encounter on Mount Hooker. The search for this evidence continued, but the political climate made it incredibly difficult. Official channels were slow, bureaucratic, and often obstructive. Yet, the mountain, through its silent testimony, continued to provide clues. The exact location of Adrian and Doina's bodies, the trajectory of their fall, and the specific nature of the damage to their gear were all consistent with an impact from above or at an angle, not a simple tumble down the slope. The technical difficulties of a military helicopter, whether a mechanical issue or pilot error exacerbated by the storm, had likely placed the aircraft in an unconventional and dangerous flight path. Adrian and Doina, desperately trying to descend in the aftermath of the storm, would have been highly vulnerable, perhaps attempting to signal for help or simply caught unaware by the approaching danger. The theory was grim. A military helicopter, struggling in the storm, had collided with or come dangerously close to the descending climbers, causing a fatal impact that sent them plummeting to their deaths. The subsequent cover-up would have been swift and absolute, burying the truth under layers of official secrecy and the vast, indifferent silence of the mountains. The evidence, unearthed after 11 years, was a powerful, if belated, indictment. It screamed of a hidden truth, a deliberate obfuscation of what truly transpired. The families, now armed with a more concrete understanding of their loved ones' final moments, vowed to continue their fight for full disclosure, to ensure that Adrian and Doina's story was not just a tragic tale of mountaineering loss, but a powerful testament to the hidden costs of state secrecy and the enduring power of truth, however long it takes to emerge. The mountain, once a symbol of adventure, had become a silent monument to an unspeakable injustice. The final piece of the puzzle, a rusted, corroded antenna fragment, lay on the forensic table, a silent witness to a tragedy that had unfolded 11 years prior. This fragment, small and unassuming, had been found embedded deep within the fabric of Adrian's backpack, perfectly aligned with one of the unusual impact marks. Its metallic composition, subjected to rigorous analysis, matched the unique alloy found previously on Adrian and Doina's clothing, the same specialized metal used in Soviet-era military helicopter components. This was the smoking gun, the irrefutable evidence that connected their deaths directly to military aircraft activity. The antenna fragment was identified as a piece of a directional antenna, typically mounted on the underside or sides of military reconnaissance helicopters for communication or tracking purposes. Its presence, deeply embedded in the backpack, provided a terrifyingly clear picture of what must have transpired. It indicated a direct, forceful impact, not a mere glancing blow. Adrian and Doina had been in the direct path of a low-flying military helicopter. The trajectory, the type of damage, and now the specific component all pointed to a catastrophic collision. The scenario, pieced together from all the evidence, was horrifying. Adrian and Doina, having survived the worst of the storm, were desperately trying to descend from their high-altitude camp. They would have been exposed, vulnerable, navigating treacherous terrain in the aftermath of the tempest. Above them, or perhaps rapidly approaching from behind them, a military helicopter, likely an IR-330 Puma, was struggling in the turbulent air. Whether on a secret mission or simply caught off guard by the storm, the pilot would have been flying dangerously low, perhaps attempting to regain visual contact with the ground or battling a technical malfunction. In the chaotic, low-visibility conditions, the helicopter would have been a silent, deadly predator. Adrian and Doina would have had little to no warning. The impact would have been instantaneous and devastating. The force of the collision, likely with the helicopter's undercarriage or a rotor, would have thrown them from the mountain face, sending them plummeting to their deaths in the gorge below. The antenna, sheared off by the impact, would have become embedded in Adrian's backpack, a gruesome souvenir of their final, terrifying moments. The subsequent actions of the military became chillingly clear. The helicopter, likely damaged but still flyable, would have limped back to base. The crew, faced with an unspeakable accident and the potential for severe repercussions, would have immediately engaged in a cover-up. In the highly secretive and authoritarian environment of Ceausescu's Romania, such an action would have been swift and decisive. All evidence of the collision would have been meticulously removed from the helicopter, the incident officially logged as technical difficulties or an unscheduled landing. There would have been no public inquiry, no search for potential victims. The mountain, vast and silent, would have been expected to swallow the secret whole. The discovery of Adrian and Doina's camp, then their bodies, and finally the antenna fragment, meticulously preserved by the mountain's icy embrace, brought this elaborate deception to light. The truth, buried for 11 years, had finally clawed its way out of the shadows. The families confronted with this irrefutable evidence felt a profound mix of vindication and unspeakable sorrow. Their children had not simply succumbed to the mountain. They had been victims of a reckless military operation and a deliberate, heartless cover-up. This was not merely a tragic accident. It was an act of injustice, compounded by years of official silence. The implications extended beyond Adrian and Doina. How many other accidents have been quietly swept under the rug by the authoritarian regime? The case, now widely publicized, became a symbol of the dark legacy of the communist era, highlighting the state's disregard for individual lives and its pervasive culture of secrecy. International human rights organizations, journalists, and a resurgent civil society in Romania rallied behind the families, demanding a full and public apology compensation, and a complete overhaul of military transparency. The Romanian government, facing immense pressure, was forced to acknowledge the findings. Though a full, unequivocal admission of guilt proved politically challenging, a formal statement was eventually issued, acknowledging the high probability of military involvement in the tragic deaths of Adrian Vlăducu and Doina Moga. The families, after years of agonizing uncertainty, finally received a semblance of justice, though it could never truly heal the wound of their loss. The mountain, which had once been a stage for their dreams, became a monument to their tragic end and a testament to the enduring power of truth. The story of Adrian and Doina Vlăducu and Doina Moga, once a whisper among climbers, became a powerful roar for accountability. Their voices, silenced on that desolate mountain face, had finally been heard, echoing across the valleys and reminding everyone that even the most carefully guarded secrets can, eventually, be unearthed. The mountains, it seemed, had always known the truth, and in their own time, they had finally chosen to tell it. The long, torturous journey to uncover the truth behind Adrian and Doina's disappearance culminated not just in a forensic discovery, but in a broader reevaluation of history and memory in post-communist Romania. The metallic antenna fragment, unequivocally linking their deaths to a military helicopter, served as a stark and painful reminder that some secrets refuse to remain buried, no matter how deep the concealment. This was more than a singular tragedy. It was a potent symbol of the human cost of an authoritarian regime's pervasive secrecy and disregard for individual lives. The families of Adrian and Doina, once isolated in their grief, found themselves at the forefront of a national conversation about accountability and the right to truth. Their relentless pursuit, fueled by 11 years of unanswered questions, had cracked open a deeply uncomfortable chapter in Romania's past. The official, albeit carefully worded, acknowledgement of military involvement, however reluctant, was a monumental victory. It validated their suffering and provided a modicum of closure that mere assumptions could never offer. It stated, in no uncertain terms, that Adrian and Doina had not simply been lost to the whims of nature, but had encountered a man-made, state-sanctioned force. The case of Adrian and Doina forced a reluctant nation to confront the fact that under the old regime, human life was often secondary to state interests and military expediency. The narrative of technical difficulties or unforeseen accidents served as a convenient blanket to obscure any incident that might tarnish the image of the omnipotent state. The Vlăducu and Moga families, through their sheer persistence, had stripped away this veneer, revealing the brutal reality beneath. Their story became a catalyst for change, inspiring other families who had lost loved ones under similarly mysterious circumstances to come forward and demand answers. It ignited a public discourse about the need for greater transparency within state institutions, particularly the military, and a commitment to upholding human rights in the new democratic era. The legacy of Adrian and Doina, once confined to the somber annals of mountaineering, expanded to encompass the broader themes of justice, truth, and the enduring power of memory. The mountains, which had silently guarded their secret for so long, now stood as a silent memorial, not just to Adrian and Doina, but to all those whose stories had been suppressed by the weight of state power. Their names became synonymous with resilience in the face of injustice, a testament to the idea that even in the most remote and forgotten corners, truth will eventually find a way to surface. The final, chilling irony of their story lay in the timing. Had their disappearance occurred just a few months later, after the fall of Ceausescu, the initial investigation might have been far different. The military might have been more forthcoming, the search more comprehensive, and the truth might have emerged much sooner. But they vanished at the very end of an era, caught in the twilight of an oppressive system that prioritized secrecy above all else. Their story, therefore, is not just a true crime narrative. It is a historical document, a window into a specific moment in time when the old world was crumbling and the new was still struggling to be born. It reminds us that history is often written in the small, personal tragedies that are initially overlooked by the grand sweep of events. The majestic Mount Hooker, once the site of their youthful dreams, transformed into a stark landscape of loss and revelation. Its towering peaks and deep gorges now forever hold the echoes of Adrian and Doina's final moments, a grim yet powerful reminder that the mountains, while capable of immense beauty and challenge, can also be the silent keepers of the darkest human secrets. Their story serves as a perpetual warning against the dangers of unchecked power and the vital necessity of truth, for only by truly understanding the past can we hope to build a more just future. The silence of 11 years had been shattered, and the lessons learned from that silence would resonate for generations to come.